one of the things I noticed you was mentioning was the murders that have been occurring in the trans community, which I feel like people on social media it gets mentioned sometimes on a very rare occasion, but as far as the mass media, they never mention it. And one thing Pose did, I think it was season two, yeah, the beginning of season two, they actually killed off one of the characters, and I thought the way they did it was so perfect because it kind of felt realistic in the fact that one day you see someone here and almost like the whole Kobe Bryant all of a sudden is just gone. It's the same situation that happens like on a regular basis for trans women. And I just wanted to talk about trans women's murders going on in the country. So, do you know what are some of those statistics and the frequency on which these things occur?
So last year reported they had 25 trans murders. Unreported from a lot of the sisters that reach out to me because of the work that I do, we had 29 trans murders. If not 30, give or take, whether or not we're talking about just Black trans women. And so and those were the ones that people knew about, right? A lot of the time, trans women are being misgendered purposely because people want to cover up how often this is happening, specifically to trans women, and specifically to Black trans women, because they know that we're counting now, and they know that it's becoming a thing now. And so a lot of the police are kind of covering it up, and then you have their families agreeing to cover it up because their families are embarrassed and they don't want anybody to know that they had a trans daughter, and so that becomes a thing. And so I think that people need to really understand and realize that a lot of the numbers around trans murders are skewed because of ignorance, which is ridiculous. So there's that. Then we also have the issue where we're talking about whether or not transitioning is heightening or lowering suicide rates. But what we see is that 16% of the suicide rate has dropped since the ideology of transitioning has become more accepted in the community. We're seeing school council visits by LGBT students lessen since the inception of Pose. We're seeing, like just the numbers, like kind of plummet in a way. But what we are noticing is that when it comes to specifically Black and brown trans folks, the number of them who say that they experience both homophobia, transphobia, and racism in schools is 98%. So we're talking about being Black and queer and 9 times out of 10 trans and experiencing all of those things at once in one school day. And this was a study that was done by HRC. I'm not just pulling these numbers out of my ass. You can go and check them. I'd like to do my research on my numbers because people need to know that this is a thing. When we're talking about the LGBT community, a lot of people are doing these numbers based off of white folks who don't really go through the struggles in the same way that Black folks do. But when we talk specifically about Black children, and when we're talking specifically about Black children in schools, the number of them that experience a plethora of different isms because of their, who they are is 98%. So imagine not having a show like Pose and not having more visibility in the media and not seeing yourself and then having to deal with those things. Like, I think that the numbers are slowly, depleting, but they're depleting for white, LGBTQIA plus people. They're not necessarily depleting it, in the most because of Black kids. Because I think that if we look back at the survey that was done the year before, we're talking about 100% of kids that were Black and saying that these were, their experiences. So we've got a long way to go as far as what it means to be protecting Black queer folks. But I do think that the visibility is helping with sort of lessening those percentages over time.
So one thing I have noticed, especially after I followed your page, I just became so much more aware of the role that cisgendered people, because people can be gay and still be very mean and cruel towards trans people. Specifically, I first noticed that when Pose did that episode where the character Blanca was kicked out of a gay bar because they were like, your people aren't welcome
Mm-hmm.
here, and it was like, you guys are all this group of people who have been considered a subgroup of society, but you still have to make yourself feel better to lessen someone else. And I was like, that was just something I was completely unaware of, because people think, oh, I might be this gay person and that automatically means I'm an ally to the trans community. Well, sometimes you
Mm-hmm.
might be like the biggest problem to the trans community,
Mm-hmm.
because they'll especially when I was watching Pose, I was like, they're reading people, quote unquote, telling them, oh, I can see your stubble or this or that. I'm like, what's up with that? So I'm just like, what do you think cisgendered people need to know regarding how problematic they have been and can be towards trans peoples? Even, I would say, I don't know, I'm not speaking of all, but a lot of black women feel like, oh, that's a man in a dress type thing. And it's just like, oh my gosh, y'all don't realize y'all are part of the problem.
I struggle with what to say in most cases around these issues, and it's only because I really do genuinely feel like a lot of them are equipped with the tools that they need. I just don't think that most of them are at a point where they care, you know. And I genuinely understand not being able to care about something that you don't understand, right? And not being able to have like a really good grasp on why something should matter when it's just not particularly your area of expertise, and you don't feel like it affects you. But what I do think that Black folk should know, right? Specifically, Black women should know, and Black men should know, is that Black LGBT people are so Black, and we go through the same amount of turmoil that you go through as Black people, while also going through, you know, the turmoil of being queer. And so having that respect and giving us that respect and loving us that much as your Black family should be a priority. And I think that that's something that I wish that a lot more of them would acknowledge, that we are your family in the same way that Kobe was your family, in the same way that, you know, all these other people whom you all have never met but love oh so much, you know. I think that we just would like that same respect given back to us as queer people. And that is where the ball is dropping, is that there's a lack of respect, because there's people, just a lot of Black folks just don't feel like we need it or that we are deserving of it because of whatever stigmas they've created in their head, you know, and that's the most disheartening thing.
You're listening to The Conversation with Khalid.
Welcome back to The Conversation. I'm here with my very special guest, national organizer and LGBTQ activist, Miss Hope Giselle, and we're getting ready to discuss Miss Flame Monroe's very controversial Breakfast Club interview. But before we discuss that, I would just like to discuss with you, Hope, what are your thoughts on RuPaul's comments regarding trans women doing drag? I'm not sure. Are you aware of what he said?
I know exactly what Ru has said. I honestly, look here, let me tell you something. A lot of folks are not going to agree with Hope because Hope's like to keep it real. That is Ru's show. That is Ru's baby, and it is a drag show. I personally don't necessarily agree with the idea as of right now of trans women doing drag, because I feel like it sends this weird message to folks who just genuinely still don't get it. And we're not at a space where they have gotten it enough for us to let them know that, you know, being trans isn't a monolith, and that, you know, you can be a trans female impersonator, which I wish that a lot of folks would understand, that when you are a trans woman doing the art of drag, that it should be referred to as female impersonation and not drag. But But there's so many layers that go inside, and I'm not a drag queen, so I'm not qualified to really talk about a lot of that stuff if you ask them. But as it pertains to RuPaul, I don't think that anything that he said was wrong. I just think that people don't like the idea of not being able to, and I spoke about this. I think that sometimes the trans community, especially trans women, feel entitled to everything simply because we're trans and we showed up. And it's just like, I really feel like it's one of those things where sometimes you have to realize when a space isn't for you. This is a drag competition that was made for men who dress up as women, and not a competition for female impersonators who are well equipped with a lot of the tools. So I think that when it first happened with Carmen Carrera, and it happened after she left the show, like, okay, cool. But then we started to have girls come onto the show who, had already had their breasts done and had already had like all of this work, and to me, it just gave an unfair advantage. And I understood where Rue was coming from. Like, you have these girls that transition and come onto the show, and like there's these men that have to put on these pads, and it takes away from it. Like when you've had facial feminization surgery, and now your beat is flawless because you don't have to worry about contouring to the gods. And I think that there's just a difference. And while I haven't heard his latest, comments in regards to Carmen Carrera coming at him again, I do think that Rue had a point. The show is for men, and if you are a trans woman, then respect that space. I don't care if you're a trans woman who does drag. Respect that space, and respect that space was created for men who do drag and not trans women who do drag. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with Rue requesting that. Like, right. That's his shit. You know what I'm saying? If you feel a way about it, then get together with your coins that you've collected since being on the show and make your own show. Right. There are not a lot of spaces where I'm with that phrasing of like, oh, make your own, whatever the case may be. I do hate when a lot of folks say that, but I think in this particular instance, it is a go make your own show if you don't like the way that Rue is running his show, because his show is for men. Right. Like, and I know a lot of people are going to say that, oh, well, what about the Black Girls Rock when Angelica Ross said that? But Black Girls Rock is made for Black girls, and trans girls are Black girls as well. Right. And so I don't think that there's a need to go and create something else when we exist, or when we should be invited into this space. But RuPaul's Drag Race was not created as an inclusive space for trans women. It was made for Black male drag performers. And if he says no, that should be what it is. And that's just what it is. And honestly, I don't think that Rue is saying no because he doesn't like trans women. I think that Rue is saying no because of the unfair advantages that being a trans woman has in drag. I really think that that's what it is. So it's just, I don't care for Rue. Let's be very clear, and I can go on record saying that I don't care for Rue at all. So this isn't about me being a mega fan. I have other issues with Mr. Charles, but I don't think that he did anything or he said anything wrong or abrasive to the trans community by saying that this is a show for men in drag. Like, I didn't get that uproar, but it is what it is.
You're listening to The Conversation with Khalid. Another drag queen that has caused a lot of talk is comedian and drag queen and hyphen a lot of other things, Flame Monroe, and she calls herself